to It's Okay to Be Gay, the podcast.
So Veronica, some people take up basket weaving and some people like knit sweaters, and every once in a while like somebody's doing a Sudoku to like pass the time and to decompress, but not you. No, ladies and gentlemen, not Veronica. What in the world were you just showing me?
So a little backstory. So I am an ophthalmic surgical assistant. So I assist in ophthalmic, so eye surgeries.
Yes.
And I assist the surgeon, and one of my things is when they're closing up at the end of the case, I am the one that cuts the suture, like with scissors.
Yes.
And I'll do other stuff too, but I always get a little jealous like watching them like doing these sutures, and it's like I don't know, I just wish I knew how to do it. So anyway, I know that people who are in med school and other surgery professions have these little things that are basically practice skin, which I'm holding up right now. And again, if you are just listening, you have to go to the YouTube to fully appreciate. But
Yes.
This is a practice skin. It's like jiggly. It's like a kind of foam.
It's like
jello.
6 inches by 10 inches, and it's like a piece of like fake skin with all these different cuts on it that you could practice sewing together.
And so you practice sewing together. You practice suturing, and it comes with different kinds of suture, like with legit needles. This is not surgical safe, so I can't like suture you up if you came over, or whatever.
Oh, okay. Well, this is not
medicine.
helpful.
What's that?
So this is not helpful then if I'm there and get cut.
Well, in a pinch, say we were out, lost in the wilderness, and you were to get a huge laceration. I would feel pretty confident like sewing you up even with this stuff. So, but it comes with these us. It comes with these little. I'm gonna click them for you. These are little forceps that it comes with. They're not surgical grade, but these are replicas of what we use actually in surgery, and little scissors, and then little needle holders or needle drivers. But anyway, so I've just been like, as a means to like relax and chill out and zone out, I've been practicing my suturing techniques.
Well, those sutures look amazing. I would encourage everybody to go check out the YouTube video, because at least watching the first couple minutes of this episode online is going to be well worth it. And then you can switch over to wherever you're listening to your podcast, because that was pretty funny. I love it. That sounds like a great way to pass the time. Probably a lot more wholesome and rewarding than sitting in front of the TV watching mindless episodes of whatever the next big show is on Netflix.
I do this while watching TV too, but it's in the background.
Multitasking. I love it. That's what we want. That's what we want. More multitasking. Speaking of multitasking, if you're watching this episode of the It's Okay to Be Gay podcast on the YouTube channel, you will notice that we are about to be teleported to a different place, and I'm very excited for that. And so I'll let you see that momentarily. But I don't know what that had to do with multitasking. I just wanted to use that as a springboard to talk about the scene change.
It was totally not relevant. Segue.
It was totally not relevant at all. Actually, no, we did multitask. What happened was I went to dinner and drinks, and then we recorded an episode of the It's Okay to Be Gay podcast. So that was multitasking, and that's what's about to happen, actually. So very excited about the guest who's on today. Very interesting story coming up here shortly on the It's Okay to Be Gay podcast. And we're really excited to be able to bring that to you and to share that with you. So let's get cracking. We don't need to waste any more time.
All right. So today we have Avis joining us. Welcome, Avis. Can you tell us a bit how you are connected or know David, as we just met tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. So David is, we have a mutual acquaintance, and a very dear friend of mine. He's always pushing me to be a better person and to share my story with other people. And so he knew about David's podcast, and here I am. So it's been a pleasure meeting David. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and yeah, just super excited.
Yeah, we are glad you're here, and thank you for agreeing to come on the It's Okay to Be Gay podcast and share a little bit about yourself. So yeah, welcome. This is great having you.
I like that you equate it as being getting to be a better person by being on a podcast. I like it. Aren't we all striving for that, right?
It's a step in the right direction for a lot of people, hopefully, being on the podcast, hearing the podcast, and growing to be themselves. So it's wonderful. But yeah, so Avis, I know a little bit about your background story and a little bit about where you're from and all that sort of things, but most of our listeners have never heard of you before. And I think it'd be great for you to start with just giving us a little bit of information about where you're from and where you grew up and kind of the environment that you grew up in. So you have the floor.
All right. Yeah. I grew up in Abilene, Texas, and for anybody who doesn't know where that is, it's about 3 miles west of, or not miles, 3 hours west of Dallas, because we measure distance in time and not in actual units of measurement. Yeah, Abilene was definitely like the belt buckle of the Bible Belt in Texas. When I was growing up there was 3 Christian colleges. It was a very, very, very West Texas town. Not all that gay friendly. A lot of very literal exegesis evangelicals living there. But I actually was an outlier inside Abilene. I was raised Mormon. And yeah, so I grew up in a small-ish Western town in Texas in an outlier community within the Christian community and a Mormon family. And yeah, I eventually have just over the years made my way towards Dallas and, just like lease after lease after lease, just slowly slinking my way in closer, deeper into like the heart of Dallas, which is where I live now. And so, yeah, spoiler alert, things do get better actually. So
I love that.
The further you get outside the little towns, things maybe improve. So coming from a Mormon family, is it fair to say that you had a large family growing up, or what was the situation there?
Yeah, I did have a larger family, but not because they were Mormon. So my family converted to the church when I was born. Yeah, the church is like what
how many churches call themselves the church. Well, none of them seem to agree with one another as to what the church is. But yeah, the Mormon church is notoriously referred to as the church.
Yeah.
So your family converted then. Okay, that's interesting.
So, just a tiny bit of genealogy because, again, Mormon upbringing. My dad had been married before, to a woman. They had 4 children and adopted 1 extra child, and then they divorced because, again, I guess spoiler alert, I don't know. Anyways, his first wife ended up being a lesbian. And then he met my mother. They had my 2 sisters and then me. So I am the youngest of 8, which does sound very, very Mormon, but none of it counted until I was born. So
Gotcha.
I like this story already.
Yes, sounds good. Keep going. So as the youngest of 8, what's the age difference between you and your oldest? I know you said so maybe not. I guess they're all biological from your dad. So yeah. What's the oldest sibling?
I don't know how old he is. However, I do know that I had nephews and nieces before I was born. So I was born an uncle. I had a sister who had children before I was born. So I'm 34. I think my eldest brother is somewhere in his 50s or 60s. So yeah.
So a little bit of an age gap.
Yeah, a little bit. My dad was quite old whenever I was conceived, and a lot of times people mistook him for my grandfather, actually. So that was kind of an interesting thing growing up too. Totally unrelated. That's a different therapy episode, but no, yeah, there was definitely a huge age gap in my siblings and I, and so. I grew up not even really knowing them, some of them, and then some of them I was their kid's uncle, even though they were the same age as me or even older than me. So yeah, it's been an interesting.
Sounds like Modern Family a little bit, oddly enough.
Yeah.
It's a great show. So cool. So coming from Abilene, growing up in this larger kind of family that was a little different probably from your neighbors and probably from other people that were in that area, because largely conservative population of like traditional Christians, not necessarily the Mormons, who some would argue fall outside the Christian envelope, but the Mormons, of course, consider themselves Christian. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast. We won't get into that. But yeah, so very interesting. So how did that shape your upbringing in terms of how you understood the normal like function for the world? Like what were people, supposed to do with their life? And then of course you realize that there's at some point in time you fell maybe outside that box. Unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So the cornerstone of the Mormon faith is that families are forever, because when Mormons say they don't say till death do us part. They believe in a marriage that happens beyond death, which is beautiful and romantic and wholesome in its own kind of way. However, they believe that because a marriage seal happens beyond death and carries on into the afterlife, a family also carries on into the afterlife. And so growing up, I was kind of the poster child for like a Mormon family. I was rambunctious and a jerk, and not a jerk, but like annoying and like a little kid. But I adhered very, very closely to the ideas of like family, no matter what. And then as I started to get older, I realized, hey, there's something a little bit different about me. Not so different, but something that doesn't quite fit with the paradigm that I've been raised with, that I've been taught all my life to adhere to. And it was frustrating because, I really wholeheartedly believed in everything that I was raised with. I thought that there was something wrong with me, and that maybe there was something that I needed to do or atone for or pray or repent, take your pick, whatever. And as I came into my teenager years, I had this kind of very stereotypical teenage reaction where it was like, okay, I don't fit into the paradigm that I was raised with. I don't fit into God's view. So if I'm going to go to hell, I'm going to go there with magical spells and all this other stuff.
So out of the parking lot, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna earn my spot. So I leaned really hard into alternative spirituality, into Wicca, and into witchcraft and things like that. And you know what? Like those spiritual systems have their own merits, and they're beautiful and wholesome, and can really promote a sense of peace and wonder and joy and serenity. I don't knock them at all for it at all, but I definitely leaned into it when I was a teenager for the shock factor of being like, I'm a witch. Like,
I get that. So, are you talking like young teenager, like 13, 14, or like is this kind of like a little bit later?
So I was into the alternative spirituality movement probably between the years of 14 and then all the way up into my mid-20s. I actually ran a YouTube channel. This is not a plug because I'm not even going to but I reviewed books and stuff. So yeah. But no, I really did continue on with the alternative spirituality for quite a while because, you know, there is merit in finding your own peace and in finding your own path. And I do really believe that there is a lot of merit and authenticity in terms of the contemporary pagan movement. But yeah, growing up, it was definitely a tool to sort of like stake my claim and be like, no, I am my own person and I make my own spirituality. I'm raw, you know, you can't tell me what to do because I'm punk. And it was not all I was cracking it up to be. But again, none of that is to say that I dismiss or you know, begrudge anything that I studied in my past. It was just, it was a time and a place kind of thing. So
yeah, and all those things that you went through or looked into or studied or practiced or believed in or whatever at that point in time, what kind of led you to where you are today? And so all that's a necessary and important part of yourself and of who you are. So none of that should be discounted or disqualified or, you know, advised for other people to avoid this or that or whatever. So that's great. But all of that, if I understood kind of the process of, you know, the transition of things, like, was all as a result of or in response to recognizing that you might have fallen outside of the norm with your sexuality. Is that fair?
Yeah, it was definitely reactionary. I came to terms with myself, and like I remember being not quite have gone through puberty, but like in the midst of it, and you know, trying to think about girls and trying to think about girlfriends, and eventually, whenever I was more or less okay with, you know, okay, I think I like guys. Again, since that wasn't compatible with my family's spirituality, I leaned hardcore into a very reactionary sort of, well, if I'm going to hell, I'm going to make the hand basket, and so it was very, yeah. I flirted with being a goth as a teenager and a punk and a scene kid and emo kid, and I know that I'm dating myself by saying that, but
welcome to the club.
right. But it was definitely an intentional, and the choice to engage in like alternative spirituality was a very specific response to my Mormon upbringing. And again, I don't regret it. I don't begrudge it or anything like that. But I do know if I were in that same situation now, I think I might have a different kind of reaction to it. So, yeah.
And how did your family respond to this kind of stuff? Because obviously being gay, first of all, would be outside of the norm and outside the envelope of like acceptable Mormon practice. But then, and I assume you probably didn't tell them you were gay right away, but kind of like bled into this like alternative, you know.
Yeah, of course not.
Stuff. So what was their response when you started kind of delving into this? Because I know a lot of Mormons. I spent, you know, good several semesters in college, like visiting with the elders that were at the, you know, the stake nearby, everything else, for my own intellectual, you know, prowess and everything, improvement. But yeah, that's something that's very like not okay as a Mormon to be engaged in these different like sort of alternative kind of witchcrafty type things. So what was the family like reaction when you started doing these things or started, you know, going to that side of the world, I guess?
Yeah, no, absolutely. My I had a pretty responsive, receptive family. My mom, she was a hippie, and my dad, he was a pretty, I want to say forward thinking. He was a pretty intellectual guy. And I remember I started drawing symbols on my wall because I was such an outrageous teenager. But anyways, drawing on my wall, and I drew different religious symbols, like, and I included like the Star of David, and I included like the crescent and star of other faiths. But I was also drawing like pentagrams because I wanted to be edgy and stuff like that. And, yeah. And I remember years later, I went back home and my room had been painted over, and I was like, Mom, do you remember all the things that I drew on my wall? And she was like, yes. And I was like, did you guys ever worry about me growing up as a teenager? And without missing a beat, she was like, we prayed for you every single night. I'm like, yeah. So even though they were very, very worried, my parents were, they to a certain extent, they encouraged free thinking. That was the thing that I had like the strongest relationship with my father, is we would sort of intellectually spar with each other. And I remember being like 8 years old, and he talked some trash about another faith, because my dad also was like a good old boy, grew up in the South, an old man, even for being my father, was an old dude. And he's had some kind of disparaging remarks. And me growing up in the 90s of like peace, love, and acceptance and all this other stuff, I was like, no, they're just worshiping God the best way that they know how. And again, I was 8 years old, and I'm like standing up to my father, having like a theological debate. And every now and then it would be like, well, damn, I guess he's right. Maybe I should shut my mouth. And so, like, my parents definitely worried about me. They were concerned, and they wanted me to make good choices. But honestly, they were just thrilled that I was going to go to a youth group that I found through a guy that I had a crush on, who is now Pan, actually, but neither here nor there. Yeah. But he was part of a youth group, and the youth group was kind of built for kids that were kicked out of other youth groups. And so it wasn't a Mormon youth group, but it had a lot of outcasts and a lot of, social pariahs, a lot of goth kids, a lot of punks, a lot of ne'er-do-wells, and, kids on probation or whatever. And I joined it, and Mormons actually are pretty hardcore. Like they train their kids very young to have like theological like arguments and stuff. And so I joined this youth group, which was also a little bit like lower income and less education, things like that. And I walk in with my unofficial like Mormon theology degree and start, like reciting Bible verses and quoting, like New Testament, Old Testament, and I know the difference and then all this other stuff. And they were like, do you want to come back? But it was so cool because that youth group, like, so again, alternative spirituality, all this other stuff, straight up, that's where I learned how to read tarot cards. Like the youth leader's wife saw me playing with tarot cards during a Christmas youth party, and she was like, do you want to read my cards? And I was like, what? And I was like, I don't really know how. She's like, well, I'll teach you. And she like it was such a cool youth group. I truly don't underestimate it when I say that I think that it saved my life, because they were just good people. They believed in multiple paths to God, and they believed in a divine feminine and a balance, and they believed that everyone was worthy and merited of love and compassion and care. And yeah, just truly just the most amazing people that you could ever meet.
It's really refreshing to hear that you had that in your youth. There's so many stories that we've heard where there's such like oppression and literally like, nope, this is the way. If you don't fall in line, like, too bad, you are going to hell, and then that's it, or you're not welcome. So that like gives me hope hearing stories like that of, you know, when we were growing up, I'll say we because we're probably around the same age, but that things like that were happening, and that's so great that you had that support. Excellent.
Yeah, it was just fantastic because it's like, again, even in the heart of Texas in Abilene, there was still like, you know, that understanding that, you know, we need to hold on to each other and we need to find community, and if we don't have that community, then we can still build it ourselves and create it ourselves. And I'm still in touch with them. They're still amazing people. So
that's awesome.
That's really neat. So that was your like kind of your high school time experience, just kind of lashing out into this new age type of, you know, concept and finding this group to be a part of. And during that time, was there ever a discussion about your sexuality, or was this all you just living this alternative thing? Like, so when did that come up? Because that seems like something that might have been a little more provocative or a little more, you know, like shocking, you know?
Right. Well, I realized I didn't answer part of your first question. I was very mum about my sexuality around my parents. They had their suspicions, but for the most part, it was a very, like, it wasn't even a conversation. It was just not addressed ever.
Yeah, so long as I made about it, it's not there kind of thing.
Yeah. So long as I made okay grades, so long as I didn't get into trouble too much, then they were just willing to not look the other way, but just pretend it wasn't a problem. And so, oh geez, I'm trying to bring it back around to the current question. Yeah, so I would, I did have a couple of dates and a couple of like I would hear whispers and stories and rumors of like gay people around, but of course I was petrified, terrified to ever investigate or like actually find anybody who was actually gay. And so
in that small town of Abilene, and I know where Abilene is. I mean, it's very wholesome, you know, multiple Christian denominations kind of like populate that town. What was there any like actual people that you knew of that were gay, or that I know you mentioned like your dad's ex-wife? You know, but like, what was your up to that point? Like, did you have any interaction with or experience or know anybody that was actually gay or out or living a gay lifestyle at that point?
Right. I honestly didn't, not until high school. I knew of the other gay guy in junior high. But honestly, the only real true exposure and education that I ever had about anything gay outside of the very biased Mormon take on being gay was honestly the internet, AOL, raised by the internet. Like that's, and a lot of people in our age demographic know what we're talking about, but it was straight up, I was talking to absolute strangers to try to figure out what it meant to be gay. And so.
Very interesting. And like, I remember growing up too in that age where like AOL Instant Messenger was a thing. And it was the first, I think, I mean, I remember when we had like Prodigy internet, like, you know, you dialed up and like you had to have, you know, whatever. And there's very few like things you could do online. And then when, you know, America Online, AOL came out, it kind of opened this door where suddenly a lot more people had access to if you had 2 phone lines, or if you had 1 phone line and were willing to tie it up by getting online, you could, get on the internet. But then you only had 1,000 free hours.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, but it was the first time that like multiple people from all over the world were able to. I'll just limit it to our conversation. In America, we're able to go online and like talk to people instantaneously that they didn't know, that weren't, people. And I remember the chat rooms. Oh my God, there was a chat room for everything. Yep. There was a chat room for everything. And Lord knows.
Go down chat room lane right here.
Yeah. What's funny is I still have Veronica's sister. She and I would go on AOL Instant Messenger and talk for hours and hours and hours in the evenings. She was in college, I was in high school at the time, and I still have copies of all of our AIM text messages. I kid you not. I kid you not. And it was like we'd talk and talk and talk, and then I would Control-A, Control-C, put it in a text document and save that puppy. It's dated, it's filed, and I still have them all. Anyway, but that's not, sorry, I got off track here. But yeah, so this is the first time like in these chat rooms where there was like complete strangers out there, and you were talking about all sorts of things. And we were just talking a little bit before we hopped on the podcast, Davis, but like I had probably one of my first like gay experiences in the AOL chat rooms as well. And it was just like totally anonymous. Nobody's ever going to know about it. And it was safe and it was secret. And like, it was a point of like discovery. So like, that's really interesting that you had a similar like interaction in terms of your like, progression.
Yeah, I met some very interesting people, and 2 figures specifically come to mind. One of them is actually a lifelong friend. Like, yes, we did meet under less than stellar or caliber, settings, because we were horny teenagers. Of course, we were going to be talking about smut. Yeah. But no, I ended up flying across the country and meeting him. Like total, you've got mail, like blockbuster movie. I
love it.
Yeah, no, I flew across country. I met him, and I've known him since I was 15, and he's also flown down from the north and come and visited me. And so, like, lifelong friend, amazing guy, like my closest friend. And I've met him a total of 2 times. But yeah, like the wonders of the internet, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah. But then also I also met and corresponded with for a very long time, for lack of a better word, a pedophile. And the concept of like grooming a child to think that it's okay for an adult man to discuss and have intimate conversations with them. It's so easy from the outside to be like, oh, well, of course, that's so stupid. No child should ever fall for that. Or, well, of course, it's so simple. It's so dumb. But as a person who went through that conversation myself, and I don't consider myself traumatized. I know there's a lot of other people who have had much worse experiences with this. But it's very easy to sympathize with a person who, I mean, like, maybe they're not mentally all there in control of their faculties. Maybe they do know, but they're just that smooth of a talker. I don't know. But unfortunately, like, again, going back to the original point, was one of the primary fonts of education and exposure to gay identity was a man in his 30s or 40s who was talking to a 14-year-old and telling me, like, hey, if you send me pictures, I'll send you pictures, or I'll tell you about boys or whatever, and Not to get too deep or anything like that, but it was just, that was my only outlet because there was no one else around, and I'm not making an excuse for him. I'm just saying that it's like when you only have scraps, you feast on scraps, and so, yeah.
I mean, I hate to, I don't want to make any necessarily comparisons, but like, I mean, myself and I know other, heterosexual women and their teens had very similar stories. I had no idea exactly who we were talking to, but there was very much that this person definitely is older and quote unquote should know better. But honestly, that is probably part of like an opening and like acceptance of my sexuality.
Yeah.
The kid was experiencing that, and it sounds terrible, and I'm definitely not condoning it, obviously, but like it was the era because it was so accessible, and it was something that was so taboo, but it was there. Like, and these people were there, and it was so anonymous, right? Like, at least from my standpoint, it was just like, so I can see how that, could shape you with that, important part of your story, just to like,
and honestly, like, when you're a teenager, you're so starved for validation. You're so just like, like you don't know what touch starvation is until you have in fact been touched, and so it's like the very first time someone said like, hey, I'm gay too. And sure, I'll tell you what this term means, because not transgressing out of like PG-13 or anything like that, but the figuring out the concept of top and bottom online just through chat, and it's like, so when the person is on top, that's when they're the top, and it's like, well, they are unless they're the bottom. And it's like,
it was like, this is
anyways, no. But again, like, you're so just like anything, please, like
attention,
affection, attention, information, anything like that. That unfortunately, since it is taboo, people do sort of get, I don't want to say a pass, but like, we recognize that like in dire straits, you do sort of resort to and accept less than great sources. And so, it's
that's all you have access to, or that's all, like you said, I mean, you got scraps, you eat the scraps. That's exactly right. Like, I remember a couple of my conversations on random, chat groups or private chat rooms or whatever else. And like, I'd get done with the conversation, and then I think it happened more than once where the person was like, you stupid homo, like, I can't believe that you're gay. And, they would like tell me off, like they were like leading me on the whole time or something. And I was like, what? I was like, how is that? I was like, so, I mean, I feel pretty confident that those people were in fact gay men, but in their mind, they were like just toying with somebody, and it wasn't real. And it actually was for them, but like, that made them feel better about themselves at the end of the conversation, where they were like, telling off some, teenager, and that they didn't have to feel like so guilty about. I don't understand why that somebody would do that, but it happened on more than one occasion. Like, I remember that vividly. But it's so interesting that was like part of your journey, your like progression, that I don't think we've heard anybody talk about that, like online chatting yet on our podcast. So thank you, Avis, for bringing that up, because it was like, I know it happened to me, like Veronica, it happened to her and her like sexual, discovery. Like, we are not alone in this, like, this is part of our conversation. But
I really do think that it's a very specific time window for people our age, like when the internet was the wild, wild west, and it was just coming into the houses, and parents didn't quite know how to moderate it or how to control it, and
that's like the thing. It was like unmonitored, and it was free access, and it was like there was no controls on it yet, because it was so new.
Yeah, and so people our age, and it's a very short time window, like a 5-year window. Yeah, like we all do kind of have these stories, and I don't think that we actually talk about them very much because, again, it took me like, over a decade to finally figure out and say out loud, like, oh, I was talking to a pedophile, like, for over a decade. Like, I was defending him. Crazy. And like I remember one time my parents like went through my sent emails and they discovered the correspondence that I had, and I threw a fake tantrum. I stormed off into my room and I intentionally moved the furniture around so it looked like I was like throwing things, and then I ripped the phone jack out of the wall so that they couldn't check the internet anymore. And but again, I went through all of that to defend, again, the only person around that I could ask what it meant to be gay, or to say like, hey, my church hates me and I feel like I should die, and like the only consoling voice was, again, sadly enough, a pedophile. And that's a very specific time sensitive phenomenon, and I mean, like, I'm not saying that younger people don't have to deal with that or older people didn't deal with that, but I'm just saying we had a very unique space in like, the cosmos of the internet. And so
I think there's been a whole lot more discussion about the threat of like internet predators now. Like the youth of today have their like shields up ready for that person that like pulls up in the white van, opens the door, and it's like,
that, Miss Emily?
Yeah.
This is a shout out to all the youngsters.
It's like they know. Guard up. That's right. Like they know now because we've all gone through that as adults, and we've seen the crazy shit that's happened out there.
Right. Yeah.
And tragedies upon tragedies of children being taken advantage of, and not just by gay people. I mean, it happens across the board. Every, person out there that in any sort of like way, preys on, this population of younger people. Anyway, so it's, but it's become a conversation now that parents have with their kids, that teachers talk about in schools, and like crime prevention awareness and, anti-drug stuff, like all now includes the like, hey, watch out for predators. Like if somebody pulls up in a white van and offers you candy, don't get in that van. Like,
right.
But so it's you're exactly right. We had this like small little window that like, it seems like we were all kind of like in that same bucket of time period where there was like access to that, and we utilized that, maybe not in the healthiest ways of sometimes, but so how did that help you to maybe come to grips with who you were, as a gay man, or identify more as yourself? And then I want you to kind of get into, maybe share if you're comfortable doing so, like, when did you first start talking about to other people that you knew, not just online, but, real life, that you were part of the LGBTQ community? Like, how did that come up for you, and how did you deal with that?
Sure. So it really wasn't until college that I felt comfortable being completely open and out, because, distance from mom and dad made it a lot easier. But I remember bringing a few boyfriends, and they were never mentioned as boyfriends, but I remember bringing a few around to the house, and like, again, my parents knew, but they didn't know. They didn't want to acknowledge. But anyways, it wasn't until college, when I had completely moved out, and I had joined like another spirituality group, and again, fantastic people. They've changed my life for the better. But it wasn't until I really got my own footing and moved out that I started to feel more comfortable being open around my parents. And actually, my dad, do you want Do you want the coming out story?
Whatever you're comfortable sharing, we are open to listening to. So sure. Yeah.
So I wasn't out to my family yet, but I was home one weekend doing laundry because I was a broke college student, and I was sitting on the washer, and my dad was going through this laundry list of things that he wanted for me in my life. And
I love it how there was a laundry list involved with the laundry.
I thought he was going to say chores, list of chores for you to take care of, not life aspirations. Wow.
I'm sorry.
I love that.
I couldn't let that go.
I'm overwhelmed for you right now.
But yeah, it had all the very stereotypical things of like, I want you to be self-sufficient, and I want you to be happy, and I want you to be all this other stuff. And the very last thing that he said at the end of this list of things he wanted for me in my life was, and he wanted me to date women and not men.
Wow.
Yeah. And
interesting.
I went through the list in my head of like, do I have time to grab my clothes? Do I have time to grab my stuff? Do I have time to grab my keys? Do I have my truck still? Can I throw things in the back of my truck? Do I need to, like all of that happened in a nanosecond. And then my dad said, I think that you've struggled. Yeah, he said struggled, but anyways, I think that you've struggled with this for a long time. And I just want you to know that I still love you.
Oh.
And
that's awesome.
Immediate waterworks. Immediately just started bawling, you know. Yeah. And it was a really excellent moment. But then my dad was like, and by the way, if your mother ever finds out, it's going to come from you and not me. And I was like, great. Thanks so much, Dad. Awesome. Yeah. And like, again, my parents suspected, and they had caught me in some pretty compromising situations before, but, for the most part, they really like, they had to know, but again, they just never addressed it. But after that conversation, I got to have a few more with my dad before he had a stroke that were really like illuminating and enlightening for him, for myself. I remember telling my dad that, you know, gun to my head, if I was told that I had to have sex with a woman or be abstinent for the rest of my life, I told him, I was like, I would be abstinent. And my dad was like, click. Oh, okay. Wow. All right. That's pretty drastic, but okay. All right. Like it took him finally to that level where he was like, all right, I got it. Yeah. And so, but yeah, like it was, a pretty, intense moment, conversation, transitionary period in my life. And I got to enjoy that for a few more months. And I moved to Denton, which is up close to Dallas. It's a little bit north of Dallas. And unfortunately, again, like he had a medical issue arise. And to make a very long story short, I ended up not really getting to have another deep conversation with my father. But just the fact that I got to have that kind of cathartic release where I got to actually, like, my dad was the one who sort of pulled it out of me. You know, he was very no bullshit. He was very, you know, again, he was a good old boy, which at times was racist and was problematic. But for the most part, he was just a straight shooter. And that's sort of how I've tried to become that man as well. You know, like I try to speak as plainly, not as plainly as possible, but I mean, yeah, I follow his lead, you know, and it's like, I always think that tact is important, but also at the same time, being just to the point, blunt, glib, obvious. Again, these are sometimes often unsung positive qualities in people, and so they can be toxic as well. But yeah, so again, like my dad really meant a lot to me, and in my sort of like coming out / being pushed out of the closet, it sort of, you know, made apparent the qualities that I wanted to embody and bring forward as another, you know, human, as a person who cares about other people and who engages with other people. So
yeah,
that's really refreshing to hear that after a long string of toxic, not supportive parents. So that's refreshing, and I love that you had that bond with him. That's great.
Yeah, it was really incredible to, I mean, because if you had asked me before that experience, I would have been like, no, my parents are going to kick me out. They're going to throw me out. They're going to cut me off and all this other stuff. Again, all with the full knowledge of my dad's ex-wife is a lesbian. I never thought that would like work in my favor with my extended family. I was just like, no, everyone in my family is a hick and they're going to hate me and I'm going to have to start over completely. And when it finally happened with my dad, I was just so floored that you know, it really made me reassess my life, my judgment of other people. Yeah, you know, I realized like, wait, you know, being a pretentious dick isn't all it's cracked up to be. People are actually, in fact, inherently good most of the time. So,
yeah, for real. And was your siblings like reaction similar when they found out? How did you tell them like kind of one by one, or did your dad just call everybody up and be like, "Hey, guess what? I've got family news."
Yeah, right. No, my dad's teacher was worried. He didn't tell anybody, but I did have a half sister. I have a half sister. And I had told her before my conversation with my dad, and she was like, I knew. And it's like, well, yes, of course, Stevie, you knew, because she's the black sheep of her half of the family. I'm the black sheep of my half of the family. She, you know, she's a film director, and she's lived in California, New York, and toured the bus in a new wave van, or toured the nation in a bus in a new wave van. And it was just like, of course, you know, but my blood sister, one of my blood sisters, I had the conversation with, the coming out conversation, and she cried, but not in the sad way. She was like, I still love you. Like, I've had an incredibly lucky response. My family has never turned me away, even though I thought that they would. They've always been loving and supporting. And again, the immediate blood family believes that they're Mormon, so families are forever. And they're like, it doesn't matter what you do, like, I'm stuck with you in the afterlife, so I'm going to love you anyways. And it's like, I wish I had your commitment to peace. Like, but yeah, eventually over the years, I've kind of stopped caring. And like last Thanksgiving, I brought, you know, a boyfriend, and I was like, this is my boyfriend. And everyone was like, hi, boyfriend. And again, I've been just, it's like excruciatingly lucky, like just the amount of support that I've received. And again, I thought it was all doom and gloom. I thought it was the end of the world if anybody ever found out. And I, you know, I cringe and I, you know, extend my sympathy and mercy and empathy and strength and support to anyone who's had, you know, the unfortunately stereotypical rough outing. But yeah, I've had just an unfathomable amount of grace and support from my family coming out. And I really couldn't have had a better departure from the closet, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And that's so, I mean, so based on everything you said up to this point, like, I'm also surprised that that was received so well. So props and kudos to your family being so incredibly open and loving towards you. I think that really speaks to, so one of my favorite things about the Mormon people, and I'll just like put them all in a pocket together, like the Mormon people is their like amazing family, like the way that they look at and treat the family unit, I think is the best example of how that should be done across the board through Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, like every faith, every non-practical, like whatever variation of that, like the Mormons do that, I think, like the absolute best. Like
so
it's amazing. I don't agree with them and their theology, and I don't agree with them and their like anything, but the way that they, I'm just trying to think like, no, there's nothing anyway, but like the way that they deal with their family unit and the concept of what family means, that's exactly what every legitimate Christian faith should view as their responsibility towards one another as family members. So it kind of surprises me, but then it also doesn't, because like that's the way it should be, and it was for you, and that's so incredible. But I've also heard a good number of like very tragic like Mormon coming out stories where like you're immediately disowned by everybody and nobody talks to you anymore. And, like, good luck. But anyway,
I like just to very briefly mention. So it's like it was not like all sunshine and roses in terms of like coming out. Like nobody gave me a rainbow scarf when I came out. I was sent to counseling a few times by my parents because they were concerned, and they did what concerned parents thought that they needed to do. I don't necessarily blame them, but also at the same time, I wish that they had gone a different route. But like a few times they found like porn on the computer or something like that, you know. And
this is pre you coming out to them, though, right?
Yes,
They like sent you to counseling and like did these preventative or like therapeutic things. Okay.
Yeah. And so it was never an actual therapist; it was like a church counselor, you know.
Sure. That was my question. Where was this therapist from? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I just lied through my teeth. You know, I was like, oh, well, I hadn't gone through puberty yet, so I thought that I was gay, but now I like girls. And, you know, and they bought it because I had heard the horror stories, you know, and while I was in college, the documentary Hate, H8, about the Mormon Proposition 8 came out, and I honestly couldn't sit through that documentary because, you know, the really tragic stories about, you know, conversion therapy and shock therapy and all this other stuff. I was like, that could have been me. That really could have been. It's just I waited and protected myself until I was far away enough removed that I was in a safe enough space to have that conversation with my family. You know, if I had done that while I was 16, my life would be radically different. I don't think that I would. I probably wouldn't have a college degree because I wouldn't have had a college degree without the support of my family. I might have been kicked out. I might have been homeless. I might have had to have gone to a conversion therapy camp. So it was definitely a waiting game. It was definitely knowing when to pick my battles. And like that's not to besmirch the name of my family or anything like that, but you know, people do change, people do move on, and people do grow in their personality and in their views and in their worldview and things like that. But I knew that if I were to be out loud and proud and be myself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make that sound mocking, but like if I were to be outrageous and defiantly proud when I was 15, I would have lost a lot of privileges that allowed me to grow to the person that I am now. And sure, losing those privileges, like that's the nicest way of putting it, of like, okay, well, I lost my truck, or okay, well, I lost internet access. Also, it could have meant going to conversion therapy, you know? And so it was definitely a moment of get through it now. When you're 18, I don't know, like join a new wave band and drive across the country in a van, and which I did not do, which I wish I did. But anyways, but yeah, it was definitely an exercise in learning when to pick your battles. And so, yeah.
It's crazy. So, Avis, this conversation is going so incredibly well that we want to continue speaking with you and continue learning a little bit more about your story. We want to delve a little bit more into your college years and then your early adult life and kind of where you are now, and continue to kind of unpack the authentic you. And what we're going to do is go ahead and pause our recording here and end this part 1 of your story. And we are going to pick up part 2 next week on the It's Okay to Be Gay podcast. So thank you for joining us, for being here, for sharing so much about yourself. And this is an incredible story, and you are just a remarkable and such an interesting being. So I want to hear more about this, and I want everybody else out there who's listening to continue to learn more about who you are and your journey into becoming your authentic self. So thank you for joining us on this part 1 of Avis's story, and we will see you next week for part 2. So appreciate you guys being there. Yes, to be continued.
Awesome.